Recording.
Are we unmuted?
We are
Can you
unmuted.
hear me online? Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, November 14th, 2023, and it is 8:52 a.m. This is a meeting of the Dallas City Plan Commission's Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee. And we have a quorum. And just for the record, pursuant to section 13E2D of the City Plan Commission rules, I am appointing Commissioner Joanna Hampton as a temporary member for the purpose of meeting quorum today. So thank you so much, Commissioner Hampton, for responding to my last minute text message and hopping on. We're very grateful that you could help us meet quorum today. So our first item of business is that we have a few public speakers.
Can we do?
Oh yeah, let's start with attendance, thanks.
Chair Rubin,
Here.
Deborah Carpenter,
Here.
Jasmine Anderson, Jerry Hawkins, Krista Nightingale, Linda McMahon, Lynette Aguilar, Matt Houston, Peter Goldstein,
Here.
Roy Lopez, Nathaniel Barrett,
Here.
Jennifer Scripps, Joe Cannon,
Here.
Colin Yarborough,
Here.
Maureen Milligan,
Here.
Joanna Hampton.
Present.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mr. Price. We do have a quorum. All right, let's begin with our public speakers. I believe there are some actually here in person and a few here to speak online. So let's start with our folks who are here in person to speak, and they will get 3 minutes each. Is our video visible to y'all online? Okay, perfect.
We have Ted Pele. Just have a seat.
Yeah. Morning, if you would just start with your name and address for the record.
My name is Ted Pele, and my office is at 7407 Fair Oaks Avenue, Dallas, Texas, 75231. Okay. I am the current president board of trustees of the Midtown Improvement District, which includes a lot of property between Northwest Highway, Central Expressway, Royal Lane, and Skillman Avenue. It's called Northeast Dallas. In one of the breakouts,
3 minutes.
yeah, of the maps. And so I represent all of the property owners and taxpayers in the district. We have a long history in reviewing the land use in the particular area, going back to really the biggest issues that we've had to face are the authorized hearing, where we were able to get that vacated for a period of time anyway. Now we have Forward Dallas. Our group has worked with Forward Dallas for the last couple of years, and now we're working with them a little closer, which is good. And we really appreciate Patrick for coming in and speaking at one of our events the other day. I'm here to review the overall overlay for this Northeast Dallas area, because I think from our perspective, there were a few things that were missing in the initial map, and we're more granular in the way that we review things. And so we've met, and we're going to meet again to discuss probably a more, not aggressive, but a more, let's say, proper way to view Vickery portion of our district as a mixed use district and not just a city urban residential district. And so our property owners over there, have basically in the past petitioned me to speak for them in trying to get, a totally MU2, MU3 district for the area. And, after speaking with Forward Dallas and looking at some other options, there are portions of city residential that are very favorable for us in combination with community mixed use. Okay. And so what I had today prepared, y'all are so fortunate. I forgot I thought the meeting was at 5. And then I sat down at my desk at 6:45 and saw that it was at 8:30. And I finished my desk and ran out of the office and left it in the computer. But I have prepared a slight presentation, and everybody should understand that the verbiage in it is a little bit less combative than it was initially. And it's more or less, speaking to the different concerns that our property owners have by, trying to put us all into this, one category of city residential. And I think our arguments are very good because of the existing property that's there. And then really, the other big thing that's never really looked at is really the density of ownership in a particular submarket. And when you look at our area of the Vickery component of Mid, what you find is that the top 6 property owners and the schools make up about 60% of the developable land. Okay, so it's the construct of, futures in that market becomes confounded in that point. The other thing we've done and is available to the committee.
Thank you, sir. That's your time.
Thank you.
I'll hand those out.
I brought these for you guys.
Okay.
I didn't.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No more speakers. No more speakers? Okay. All right. That concludes our public speakers portion of the meeting. I believe our next item is our forward Dallas update with Mr. Ayu.
All right, thank you all so much for joining us in our unique, intimate setting out here. She liked this better. Is that right? Well, hey, everybody. So what we're gonna do today is gonna be a pretty short agenda, hopefully. And also excuse me in keeping my mask on. This was under the weather a few days, just taking all precautions. So what I'm gonna do is we're gonna talk through the residential place type discussion and also the industrial place type discussion based on the feedback that you all provided us the last few meetings. We also shared with you all the draft language within the industrial place type and the residential place type. We're going to share that too as well. After this meeting, the public will also get the information that we're going to share. So give me a few seconds to get this on our screen.
One other item for the record real quick, we have Commissioner Wheeler online. So additionally pursuant to section 13E2D of the CPC rules, I appoint her as a temporary member of the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee for purposes of meeting quorum. Great, thank you so much, Commissioner Wheeler, for joining us today and helping us make quorum and for responding very quickly to my early morning text message, scrambling to get our numbers there for quorum. So thank you. Mr. Gu, back to you.
All right, so give me about 30 seconds and I'll share this with the WebEx audience. We'd like to confirm how it looks on,
It should look like this, shouldn't it?
Okay, awesome. All right, so again, thank you all for joining us today. Again, the conversation is gonna be over the residential place type and industrial place type updates that we made to the document based on the feedback that we received. So we're gonna jump straight into it. So the first place type we want to discuss is our newly created community residential place type. Just a quick overview in terms of what that is. One second. So as we mentioned before, the last few weeks that we've had conversations looking at the traditional residential and the blended residential, a lot of overlap related to those particular place types. So what we've done is combine those two, but still talk through those particular urban form characteristics in the text descriptions. So this just gives a quick overview of what the place type is going to include on the plan document. So one, talking about the curvilinear form and the gridded form that we see in that place type, the urban form characteristics are going to be designated and spelled out in the particular place type description under community residential. Both are going to talk about it being the predominant land use that we have in the city, predominantly single family, context sensitive single middle housing such as duplexes, smaller multiplexes, also helps to increase housing choice, and non-residential and apartment uses that are within that particular place type, talking about the location and where that should be, specifically around activity centers, commercial corridors, and commercial nodes. So this spread that we're looking at here, this is the draft layout, and the first page of the first layout of the community residential place type. So again, what we're going to be doing is showing quick context as to why it's important to have this particular place type, showing some graphic imagery related to how that place type looks like in the city, and then a quick character description kind of defining what this particular place type embodies, in addition to a land use mix graphic at the bottom. So as you look at each place type when we develop the full document, each place type is going to look similar to this, where you have a quick overview of why it's being developed, imagery of what it is, a quick some quick paragraphs to describe this purpose, and then a land use mix diagram to talk through that as well. And just for quick notes, as we work on publishing this document, there are going to be a few different ways we're going to be showing newly added pages, newly added text as it comes out for the public. We're going to have two versions, one that kind of shows newly added text, and another one that just shows just the document cleaned up. So when you see an asterisk at the top right left-hand corner, it's a newly added page. When you see text that's in purple or magenta, that signifies it's new text or edited text. And then text within this particular draft that's in red, just for the purposes of internal review, that is what we're keeping red just to develop and think through updated. So this community residential place type, again, this new layout's going to be an embodiment of how the other place types are going to look like. So it's going to be a place type application section, an adjacency section, and an urban design element section. And within each of those sections, we have different icons to signify how those particular themes that are in the beginning of the document connect to each of these particular place type application pieces. So for community residential, going back again, in addition to showing both the curvilinear and the gridded form, both of those, I guess, urban form types within the community residential, they still have similar mobility and access elements that we want to achieve: open green space, parking, building form. We're going to be identifying that through text and then through the graphics on these spreads. So what I want to do is just stop there, kind of talk through the particular either layout text that we shared with this body, and continue to get some more feedback related to one, this particular new residential place type, and also to how we're starting to develop the spread.
Excuse me, can we get a copy of that in print?
Can.
I can lend you mine. I could.
Oh, wow.
You can have it. It's fine. Or,
Thank you.
sure. Members, any questions or comments?
Is there a reason why you chose community residential CR? It seems it has a bit of potential for being mixed up in people's minds with the zoning type of CR, which is community retail. Do you consider something like neighborhood residential?
So the data is still being developed. So right now, that is in this moving tweak. So right now, that's simple.
Question for the local examples section. Can you zoom into that? Because I briefly looked over the PDF you also know a few days ago, but I missed that part.
I'm not sure if it's
I guess I'm looking at, I guess that's 5 and 2. Those are abbreviations, or might help just, I guess, to spell those out, but.
DSD, DS.
So again, going back to, if it's in red, it's just text. It's just other,
So what I would say is the
the regs that we have now for local examples would be Lakewood, Buckner Terrace, Parkdale, Kidd Springs, Kessler Park, Arcadia Park, West Love, Prestonwood, Queen City. But it's just varied neighborhoods here in Dallas. We're trying to get a broad section of both two different types of urban forms and different neighborhoods from different.
Okay, one, kind of, so we've also gone before a few other bodies between the last time we met, specifically Urban Design Peer Review Panel and our Environmental Commission. So some suggestions that we heard from UDPRP, Urban Design Peer Review Panel, is possibly looking at other best practices that probably embodies or could embody that same type of community residential in the country. So that one right now is kind of up for discussion internally in terms of finding what that looks like. I think there's different contexts with looking at other parts of the country. So that was one suggestion we heard here a few times. Urban Design Peer Review Panel also suggested that too, in addition to our Environmental Commission, thinking about how do we look at other more aspirational communities that are driving some of the things that we are doing now in the city of Dallas. So we're thinking through how that could apply to these play sites, or if they should apply to these play sites. And that's one suggestion, kind of idea that I'm also bring up just to have you all ponder as well.
Could you explain the significance on, I think on page 20 and 21 of the numbering system here, where you CRA 1, CRA 2?
Right, so as we are thinking about how this document is going to be used for staff, staff is going to be looking at these place types and being able to identify within community residential A2 or application 2, this order section we call it, it's still up for grabs how we're defining that. Trying to think of a naming convention to easily identify where in the document the particular language is located for easy reference. So right now, that's kind of what we have. Again, placeholders still developing as we go. Other documents in the country have policy, application 1. You kind of do it in different ways, but that's how we started.
And this number's not going to show up on the map.
No, that's just for the document reference.
But this would be, if a case goes to CBC, either staff or CBC member will be able to reference and say,
It does or does not.
yeah, it doesn't comply with CRA 2. That's my rationale for why I'm saying that.
But maybe a word in front of CRA 2, like policy or goal CRA 2, because as a cold reader to this, I was initially shared Commissioner Carpenter's confusion about what those were. I thought those were a placeholder, frankly, but some sort of adjective or noun that goes in front of that, just so we know.
And also to not included in these few spreads is going to be a how to use this section. It's going to show you basically like this is how you read this document. So definitely we can do that too. Yeah.
Two other quick thoughts. I do like the suggestions from Urban Design Peer Review Panel and the Environmental Commission to include the more aspirational pieces in here that may not fit every neighborhood, with the understanding that this is not a zoning change for any particular area, and that it just sort of establishes what's up for discussion. If something that's especially aspirational doesn't fit somewhere, it doesn't mean that it has to go there necessarily, but I do like opening the discussion. I did have also had Commissioner Carpenter's reaction. CR sticks in my head as community retail. I don't know if I fall in favor of neighborhood residential, just because I don't want to suggest the other residential areas that have other uses going beyond, single family heavy or not neighborhoods. So,
Not ready to, it's just.
No.
Yeah, community resident, the CR is just, I'm good on CPC too long.
so, maybe y'all can think of some alternative options for that.
I do have a concern on CRA 3 about the underutilized lots still, that wording still being there. Because I've just seen too many times when underutilized is construed as just a lot that a less affluent.
Yeah, and we've gotten some of that feedback also. So the document will have a glossary of terms terms. And so sometimes either it's removing that term or better defining some of those terms, because we've gotten some feedback from community members where we use terminology and someone reads it and their interpretations are different. So we want to just make sure that
Yeah, if we could find better wording, I would prefer that to definition, because that's going to jump out at people and their minds are gonna go wherever their minds go, but it's not necessarily they're gonna go to a glossary.
What does underutilized mean to staff? Do you have a definition for that?
So I think in the CRA3 and the underutilized, the info development, that's meant for property that's along major corridors that may not be, that either is vacant or maybe it may be commercial that doesn't have a tenant in it. And some people say that's vacant, some people say that's not, some people say it's underutilized, but it's property, it might be a commercial parking lot that's underutilized, a commercial parking lot that is not in use a majority of the time. And that would be the property where you say, okay, we're trying to find housing around these communities. That's a location where you can put additional housing without adversely affecting, the existing community. And so that would be an example, it's a faith-based organization that no longer has regular attendance and the parking lot behind it. That might be an underutilized property. It's a commercial strip that does not have very many tenants anymore. It's a big box store that's along a major corridor that again doesn't have a tenant anymore.
Okay. So I figured you give 3 or 4 examples that all apply to non-residential property. At least from my perspective, where underutilized primarily becomes problematic. So when we talk about residential property, it's the sort of replacing the 800 square foot house with the 3,200 square foot, whatever epithet you want to use for that. Are you primarily or even exclusively talking about underutilized non-residential property here? Are you talking about, do we need a different descriptor for vacant residential or unoccupied residential? I don't know.
I think we probably need to dive into that
Okay.
more and have more declarative language on that, where we're talking about property that is non-residential, that is not being utilized. And then we have property that is residential that also may not be, and I don't want to, it's the person who has 2 lots and they have 1 house. And you say, okay, well, is that an opportunity as opposed to a 1,100 square foot house? And someone says, that's underutilized, I can turn that into a 4,000 square foot house and make a lot of money. That's not underutilized. So it's having better language to talk about that.
Or I get developers who want to, redevelop an existing home, and I explain why it's not gonna work, and then they tear the house down, and go, well, now it's a vacant lot.
Yeah, and
Well, it's still owned, whatever.
yes, I agree, but I also want to make sure that CLUB is having a conversation where we're talking about a community and having that understanding that are there opportunities within that community to add additional housing where it might be an 800 square foot house and someone says, I would like, it's a bigger lot, it's on a corner, can I make that a duplex? And finding the right language to say that might be appropriate, not to say that it's underutilized, but where are those opportunities?
Yeah, I think we would prefer we weighted the value judgment here. The word underutilized is a value judgment. So you could just say vacant and redeveloped lots. There's no, just a lot that's being redeveloped. There's an opportunity for infill development to happen, and the redevelopment is not our job. I don't think it'd be our job to assign a value judgment to that redevelopment happening here. Just like recognizing that it does happen, and one person's underutilization is another person's treasured neighborhood. Something along those lines where we just avoid trying to call out something that's underutilized. Vacant is vacant, and a lot that is being redeveloped is a lot that is being redeveloped.
Even maybe vacant lots and other properties that could also provide appropriate opportunities or some. Attach the adjective not to the property itself, but to the opportunity.
Yeah.
Members? Other questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, I have a question, kind of help me out here. So I know with kind of pointing out the curvilinear and gridded structures of neighborhoods. So I'm looking at this urban design and I understand the whole history, but help me explain, I guess, understand why is that? And I'm looking more at the urban design element section where you've got this key here. So what's the,
Yeah, so the idea, because we haven't completed this spread, so in the urban design elements at the bottom, where it has all the numbered items, those basically apply to both of kind of the curvilinear or gridded form. So what we're gonna be doing is, say for number one, supporting commercial areas that should be designed in a manner that promotes walkability, including landscaping, mineral cuts, pedestrian scale lighting. We can kind of put number one on each image showing kind of where graphically that appears. There's going to be probably a few or minimum amount of elements that probably relate specific to the curvilinear context or the gridded context. As we start to look through these, most of these apply to both. So right now we're kind of again still up for discussion about how we're going to be showing that on the graphic and then on the urban design elements at the bottom. But what we wanted to do is show graphically how those elements will appear on each of those contexts, depending on where it is and in this particular place type. We haven't really identified any unique ones so far. We thought we'd have a bunch more, but what we want to do is moving forward this particular place type, we want all communities to be walkable, to establish pedestrian network, to have all these elements, although some were built before the 1950s where that more gridded context appeared more often. Some happened afterwards. We want to still make sure that this particular community would still be able to push forward some urban design best practices in these particular contexts. So right now, the idea is to identify those numbers on the graphic and then those that are unique to those urban design structures or constructs. We would show those with a unique graphic symbol.
okay, so then when that is using this in the future, there, why is it important to know the difference between a curvilinear versus, I mean, like, I understand it from an urban planning perspective, but then why is that kind of like a basis for reference with those two types?
What we've heard in the community is that the more either suburban curvilinear neighborhoods versus the more gridded compact neighborhoods, that they just feel different. So like you mentioned, like M Streets versus what's happening kind of far North Dallas and some of those residential communities, those feel different. So what we wanted to do, although those communities are in terms of scale about the same, want to be able to identify those different types of kind of physical elements. And so that's kind of the idea behind kind of showing those two here. If we're going to show some kind of graphic that represents those communities. So having one graphic would kind of lean toward one or the other. So showing the two, in a sense, covers those two major environments that we see in the city that are still within this scale, and still have the same land uses, but still have a different form factor.
So what I would say is that when you think about the two different types, like, the curvilinear versus the, there's a different geometry a lot of those lots. And so if you have a 50 by 150 foot wide lot, and someone decides to build a duplex on it, and they put 2-car garages there, well, basically that means you don't have a front yard anymore because you have 40 feet of driveway. If you have an 80 by 100 foot wide lot, well, now your driveway might be a little bit different because you have a wider, that front yard or that walkability is different because you either have more frontage to put driveways maybe on both sides or to put them over here versus the 50-foot lot where you say, well, no, now let's go ahead and make the garage in the back, or let's have access in the back. So it's thinking through those different forms of those neighborhoods and different aspirational urban design ideas.
So is it the lot width that's the determining factor, or is it the curvilinear versus the, I'm still having trouble wrapping my mind around the fact that curvilinear versus gridded is such a significant difference.
Well, and we obviously we can move away from that. If that's what club would recommend. We can think through how we I don't want to say blend because it's not the word we're using anymore, but how we can make it more of a standardized place type. But there is the idea that when you have the neighborhoods that have built before that have that grid network that have that connectivity, and then you have one where it's more curvilinear and you have less access. You have less access to the major streets. You have potential for those screening walls around the neighborhoods where it's a 400 housing units in that neighborhood. There's only 2 access points to it versus a gridded network that might have 20 access points to that neighborhood with the same amount of housing.
I think also too, I think we're trying to avoid the word suburban and more urbanized communities in the city within this place type. So just based on some community feedback, some discussions here, I know we try to go away from that particular word, suburban, but that, to be honest, that exists in the city. Those are 2 different forms. So how we want to designate or kind of name those here, we're open to feedback.
Well, while there are different forms in the interior possibly of the neighborhood, and I know there's some that have screening walls, so there are a lot of curvilinear neighborhoods that don't have screening. You still have edge, you're gonna have a rectangle somewhere around the neighborhood. And it looks like, where you're talking about adding density here, like on number 13, you locate single family attached and multifamily development along the main corridors to provide local housing choice. To me, that basically means the perimeter.
So that, to be honest, that's actually red because we don't know if we're going to be including that, just based on feedback that we've gotten.
Where did the red come from? Is that urban design?
No, so text that's in red is in development, it's still being tweaked and refined based on feedback that we've heard from this body in terms of if that should be included or how we have.
So what this is saying to me is that that's the only place you think multifamily should be. You've been talking about small infill multifamily, like the type that exists in Mr. Barrett's neighborhood. Where, or in the M streets that where it's considered to be appropriate to have this. But this would seem to limit it just to the surrounding major streets.
So I guess 2 things. So we want to be very context sensitive in terms of where additional housing and density occurs anywhere in that community, depending on where it is in the city. Typically, when you have particular corridors of more traffic, that usually lends for better transit because more people are going to be taking it. And just in terms of just the efficiency, that makes more sense. In terms of the community at large, having more housing within the interior could make more sense depending on where it is and how traffic is going to be, going through that. But I think typically you want to have it along those corridors for just ease of getting more people in and out of that neighborhood without having trucks and things go within that community. So I think it's very critical that we're being context sensitive and being critical about where along particular nodes and corridors that we're heading at. I think there's a particular item, might be another place like that kind of talks about kind of the focus of where you place that density, but this is red, they wanted to still talk through. Do we craft it this way? Does that make sense in this place like throughout the document, or is that something that we remove or pull when we think about a different way of talking through density within these place types? So to be honest, this is kind of this review still up for conversation and.
Yeah, I mean, I understand how the main corridor is a logical place to put density, but this almost looks prescriptive as if that this is the place, the only place it should go.
Right, and it's not intended to be the only place, but as Mr. Hu mentioned, if you're going to add moderate amounts of more housing, in existing neighborhood residential community place site, the idea is that it would be along those major corridors or those nodes. Not very small, but smaller amounts of increase in housing would be something to look at in that place type overall. But, a 32-unit, 2-story apartment building might not be appropriate in the middle of a street that has almost exclusively single family. But, you know, an ADU or duplex might be more appropriate to be in the interior of that community, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, but I'm just not sure that it would make sense to someone reading this code.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the language needs to be more clear in how this plan is recommending additional housing in this price tag.
Yeah, I would go further. I think number 13 of the building form belongs in here at all. If we're talking about main corridor, you know, that said to me, people of a certain housing type have to be along polluting, noise pollution, air pollution, our heaviest transit areas, places that are less desirable as, you know, reserving places with less nuisance to other people who are privileged. So I don't much care for that. I think that part should be removed entirely because there's not, there's nothing, I mean, there's nothing that prevents multifamily development on.
Right.
It's certainly not traffic and all that.
No, definitely. I think that was actually the reason that I specifically called this right, because that was a particular comment we had before, in previous meetings. But there's also a piece in terms of the just efficiency of how neighborhoods work and are developed. You kind of have to put things in certain places to be able to just efficiently make that community, in terms of people going in and out of the community more efficiently. It's a particular way that's developed just through the best practices. So we're thinking about the best way of saying that from an urban design forum perspective. And like you said, it might not even need to be here. It might just be something that happens from a engineering perspective, you know, since those have already been developed. But I think there's a piece of that we kind of wanted to think about. I'm curious what y'all think about that.
Yeah, that's not an engineering problem. It happens because it's easy to assemble land along, you know, along larger corridors, right? And it's harder to get rezonings where appropriate. We're talking about changes to our zoning approach here, so we're removing that issue, and then somebody can figure out the engineering. That's fine. And there's not an access or a problem. There's no problem that exists. If anything, I mean, a lot of these like suburban type neighborhoods you're talking about have humongous streets that are way easier to access than older streets where you'll already see. So my street is pre-World War I streetcar neighborhood. It's got 40, 50 dwelling units per acre. No problem with the traffic and getting through and out. And there are a lot of these suburban streets that have 50-foot wide right-of-ways. It's curb to curb. And I don't think we got a problem on just access. And in fact, I'd go with most of the building form and character elements in here. I mean, certainly 12 through 15 all say to me options for people to object and slow down and remove housing under a variety of pretenses when they really just don't like housing. They say it's too tall, it doesn't taper enough, all these things that are just barriers to, you know, let a lot of armchair architects comment on things that are either aesthetic preferences or really just pretenses for avoiding having more housing in their home in the first place. So scale and character comments on things that aesthetic value judgments don't really belong in this to me. That would be, for me, we would cover 12 through 15 as well as adjacency CRB2 and CRB3.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I still think there's a role for context sensitivity. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that people can use those as pretext, but at the same time.
I've never heard anybody, sorry.
No, that's okay.
I've never heard anybody be able to give context sensitive a definition other than it looks like the stuff that's already there, which is not what you're proposing. And it's more dense, it's too big, not enough facade articulation, too tall, something that, these are all things that just come with more people living in a place. Though that should be the priority, is how to accommodate these people in a great, accommodate the people and the needs we have there, not if you can do that, if you can fulfill all of our aesthetic requirements, which you probably can't.
Yeah, I think what we hear from the community too. I think all you said makes sense. Whatever, I think what we want to do too, is that different communities are live what they are because they like their surroundings. So whenever those surroundings change, they start to kind of question like, why am I here? And a lot of the things I invested in doesn't look the same. And communities change over time. So community, 30 years from now might look different because there'll be different people there, different people groups, ages. It's gonna look different. Even the economy's gonna look different. But I think being able to be sensitive to those contexts as it evolves over time, that's kind of where we're trying to go to. So I think it's kind of two pieces to that. And you still want to be able to house, increase the development, and still kind of touch on those housing issues that we have in the city. Also, too, we want to be able to still respect the communities that exist in the city because they're there for a particular reason. That they like the context, they like what's in their surroundings. They tell us, we don't want to be this, want to be this. We don't want to be this, want to be this. So being able to still maintain what that is to them, that's kind of what we're trying to kind of do through this language crafting in here. So I think that's the piece of like the context sensitive defining that. It looks different depending on where you are. So that's kind of why some of the language is in a sense fluid. Also, too, we still want to be able to make sure that as new development comes through, new zoning cases come through, that it is context sensitive depending on what the community says is context sensitive, because they'll be the ones to come in and speak their minds as to how that relates to their environment.
I hear you, that what I want for this forward Dallas is to be biased towards allowing development to happen, but not status quo biased. Right now, I feel the language in those areas in particular, and which is the bulk of what we have in here, is status quo biased. So there's lots and lots of wedges and levers here for someone to say, this is not context sensitive, this is not respectful, and context sensitive is such a nebulous term that you can use that as a roadblock to doing anything. And what I don't want is we end up with some design review committee who has to everything approve things, and it takes 2 years to get anything done because it doesn't have the right color break or something. I know there's some limits on aesthetic things by state law.
No more.
But you could say, but there's a lot of things in here. You say somebody's proposing, I'm going to build a triple decker. You're like, well, that's not context sensitive because all the houses here are 26 feet. Now you want to do them, that's 36 feet. So like, can you taper it? And suddenly you're cutting off somebody's front living room just because why? Because it wasn't context sensitive. That is a bias towards the status quo. I want to see bias towards the forward act, Dallas. I want to see bias things that you try to respect. How you're going to build in context sensitivity while biasing toward having action, saying yes.
Right.
They ask.
It is, it's a difficult, because yes, Forward Dallas should be a document that promotes that creates more housing in Dallas, more housing in all of communities in Dallas. But again, to Mr. Agu's point, there are a number of people who, they walked into a neighborhood, drove into a neighborhood, they looked around, they said, I like the way this looks, and they bought there, and then development happens, and 10 years later, like, it doesn't look like what I bought into, I don't like this anymore. And there's that frustration. And it's figuring out a way to understand that frustration, and if there's a way to speak to that frustration in this document, I think we should be.
I mean, but we can't allow somebody's personal preferences, and because their property is not changing, but things around them may be changing. You cannot freeze things and lock things in amber so that we are to the exclusion and detriment of everyone else around it, and the people who would like to live in Dallas but instead have to or end up choosing to live in Argyle or Aubrey or something, or very far away places. We're trying to bring people back to Dallas. Right now, it's not happening because so we want to plan for that, not for, well, everything's fine in my neighborhood, nothing should change because it's working for me. Well, we're trying to plan for the future and everybody, and not only the status quo and the people incumbents.
I understand and agree with a lot of what's being said. I mean, at the end of the day, what does need to happen is rezonings or a rewrite of the development code that follows on to this. And I do think inevitably what will happen is compromise on, I don't think we're going to, abolish zoning or anything like that through our, whatever comes next after Forward Dallas, but the zoning changes will need to get through the process. And as much as I am not in favor of overly strict requirements, that inhibit the development of additional housing in the city, we certainly need it. And I understand that how context sensitivity can be weaponized by people who don't particularly care about our housing prices that we feel now, that we're experiencing now, and trends look like we will continue to experience in the future if we don't take major action. I do think context sensitivity, ensuring people that, they're not going to get a 5-story wrap built next to their single family home. I think that obviously the market probably wouldn't bear that out, but, giving people this sort of assurance about context sensitivity, even though with the understanding that it can be. What was that?
I think there's some bedrock of certainty that people experience. As you say, that you live in a single family home, and are you gonna have a 5-story wrap next to you?
And I want context sensitivity to say probably, 5-story wrap doesn't come in next to, in the middle of, sandwiched on with single family homes on both sides. But at the same time, context sensitivity shouldn't, stand in the way of duplex, triplex, quadplex coming in next to potentially a single family home, because you can do things in terms of scale and massing of those sorts of missing middle housing that I think does address many of the good faith concerns that people raise, while at the same time, I don't want to put this tool in the hands of individuals who necessarily just want to encase things in amber, as Mr. Barrett said, when we are facing such a great housing crisis. So I feel like we need something about context sensitivity in there, but maybe some sort of caveat that context sensitivity can't be this nebulous thing that is always leads to a no.
Well, and hopefully the residential place types by design, by having multiple residential categories and by having description in the place type about placement within that place type, hopefully those tools provide that guidance. We've also talked about, how do we define mid, high rise, low rise, and making sure that's context appropriate as well. So that even if, community residential may allow some density, where is that placed within the lot, and how do we differentiate community residential from the higher residential categories and step that up appropriately. So hopefully the language within the place types and the designation between the place types, does in fact have meaningful difference in terms of scale.
Yeah, I think too, few things to kind of talk through some of these issues that we're bringing up. So I brought this initial slide back up. So as we're developing all these place types, we're starting to actually define the land uses that are part of these place types. So I think basically knowing like what is single family detached, talking through brief descriptors about what that is, typically in terms of unit mix, amount of units. Each land use is going to have a descriptor that talks about what that looks like. So as you start to kind of put those together from a land use mix perspective, you can then start to see what that scale looks like from just those mixes of land uses. And also too, I'm also developing is also maybe doing a quick kind of a section of what that community could look like. So when you have a community with these land use mixes, starting to see like, okay, it's going to include a few two duplexes, a few detached homes, a few multiplexes, kind of showing how that looks like graphically. also want to kind of see what that particular community looks like from those land uses alone. So as we start to delve into the character descriptions and some of those other elements, I think going back again to number 13, that might not be needed if we're defining those pretty clearly from a land use perspective. And these other urban design elements are very clear with what that needs to look like. But I think that's kind of how we're approaching it, but I'm curious, as we develop this further, if the urban design elements can have another dimension of doing that without, pulling us in the past, like we a bunch of mentioned a few times, we're open to tweaking that as well.
Members?
I'll just add, at the end of the day, it's a political process and it has to get
Right.
Community buy-in
Mhm.
and council's buy-in, and I think it's gonna be a very difficult path forward if there's not, I don't care what we call context sensitive, but there's got to be some
Right,
nod to appropriate as opposed to inappropriate development.
Right.
And I don't know how to word it, but I just don't see, I can see this getting bogged down completely
Right.
if we're advocating
100%.
Yeah.
density without some
100%.
recognition that it has to be appropriate.
And so from the Southwest area plan, that task force has talked about being grossly incompatible.
Which also,
Make sure it's.
it all comes down to subjectivity of
There is.
But hopefully if there are actual thresholds that need to be called out, hopefully it is actually called out. I mean, I know it's a long range plan and not a zoning code, but hopefully like if we mean mid-rise, we don't mean high rise. Hopefully we call.
There's a cap.
That's a great point, because like at the end of the day, this is a 25-year kind of visionary document. We're anticipating 300,000 people in the city. That's a different city than we live in right now. It's different. So no matter what we do, or don't do, it's gonna look different no matter what. So it's basically, how do we prepare for that and let everybody in the city of Dallas know, hey, people are coming here, transportation is gonna look different, housing is gonna look different. Everybody has to think through that. Your community is going to look different in 20-25 years, because it's gonna be 300,000 more people here. So how do we plan for that too? So I think that's a unique thing, because it's important, because as we are kind of evolving to that place, we want to do something in a way that we still want to stay in our communities, but in a way that still respects and provides opportunity for new people coming to the city, so we can have another 300,000 people in the next 25 years. We just keep evolving. So I think that's a very hard kind of balance, kind of seeing where we are now, but also preparing for what the future is kind of, or predicting for the future. So it's a very hard kind of thing to do.
Well, I would say that just the most problematic for me, we're gonna just simplify it.
Yeah.
Be 13, 14, and 15.
Mhm.
And then number 12 should just be something as simple as the development should be context sensitive and complement existing buildings. That would be, all the rest of it is kind of just, like I said, like more openings for people to oppose things, when we're just trying to give a nod to what the neighborhood and to what should be context sensitive.
I'm just trying to think through number 10. Kind of it briefly come up where buildings are located on the lot.
Yeah.
And let's say that you have a community where what's been built is 20 feet from the property line, but then you want to add density and you can move closer. Again, do we want to try to kind of say, move toward the front property line where appropriate, or is that too watered down? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think if we're looking at this, we want to provide kind of general, locations and scale without going into zoning kind of specifics. So that's a great point. Where does that cut off? Like, how do we craft that language? And we're still kind of massaging what that looks like. I'd be curious with the kind of the CPC kind of leadership here, like what they see that this can do to help them with when building cases come through. But I think it's a great point, Peter. Like,
I know we're trying to activate the streets, that's the goal, right?
Right.
And so, then again, it's kind of this balance of, what's happening there,
Right.
And is it in fact activating the street if it's not right on the street? I'm sure there'll be some cases where going all the way to the front property line is not what's been done in a particular neighborhood. But the goal, obviously, is to provide a welcoming walking environment. That's the key, right? That's what we're trying to encourage. And whatever this nebulous context sensitivity is.
That's the point.
Backing up a little bit, I mean, I think I'm looking at page 19, future land use mix. In this, what we're calling community residential, is commercial a primary use?
No, it should be a supportive use.
Oh, so again, it's sort of that graphic should be, it's an updated graphic, I think, the particular version we have.
And then we've still got the multiplex.
Which would be defined as a smaller multi-unit building,
Yes.
but it would not be a larger apartment building.
So it should, because current definition, less than 10 units.
I think right now, the definition of glossary term is, I think it's 10 or less units.
Still sounds like the US Senate or something.
I have a comment on this, at least with the, and I know that it does say character description, but that point that, I think part of our discussion here, and I think what it has been about, how does residential land use accommodate the growing population? I don't know if it's particularly in this paragraph or these two paragraphs, but it would be a great, that statistic that you just gave us as far as stating, within the next, whatever that time span is, we're anticipating a 300,000 additional residents. That way, the decisions that we're making here, have some like quantitative backing as to, okay, here's why the decisions are being made for this type of land use in these residential areas.
Or even in the part that talks about the context of Hartsburg and part of it, that might be an opportunity to highlight that as well. But the reason why we're making these recommendations is because all of these people are coming to Dallas. We can't case everything in amber and secret and sanity and say nothing's gonna change.
No, I think that was kind of the, put all over the place again. So basically, the context sensitive area, we have that the area too as well. I think that the idea of each place type, I think it's a feedback we got multiple times is, how are you framing the purpose of these place types and why it's important for these descriptors to basically be the way that they are? So I think kind of a good point, maybe that particular quote that we mentioned or statistic can come in there too as well.
On page 19 of these local examples, what's it? The DSD, DFD, DSD, it's a place. I would just be a gibberish. Okay.
That's where I would like for, because right now the decisions I have are Lakewood, Buckner Terrace, Parkdale, Kidd Springs, Kessler Park, Arcadia Park, West Love, Prestonwood, and Queen City. But I would be more than happy to have suggestions from the club to say, this is, here's a great neighborhood, and this is aspirational. This is what we're thinking.
Chair Rubin, can I hop in?
Oh, absolutely, Ms. Milligan.
First off, I think having these 2 pages as a reader makes it a lot easier to kind of ease into this description. So I love that you've been able to add an additional page for each of the place types. I had a question regarding the context on the left-hand side. I think it's a very good statistic to use, but I wanted your thoughts on how you're going to tie that into implementation, or how you'll help people understand that while these place types and moving towards greater density throughout the city and allowing different housing typologies can help address affordability issues, it's not the only tool. It's not the solution, and they're going to have to be other non-zoning solutions to help address affordability issues. So have you thought about adding, I guess, additional context into that context so that there isn't this misconception that this plan in itself and in zoning itself could resolve
Yes,
affordability issues?
yeah, so a few things, let me know if you can't hear me, I can speak louder.
No, I can hear you.
Okay, cool, so, the context section is two things that we're adding to this, kind of a links to our existing conditions report. So we kind of have, each page is gonna have, a link to that, and also to learning more about kind of what, where that stat came from. That's a kind of looking to the past. Going to implementation, it's important to note that this is a land use document, and all this recommendations moving forward, they're gonna be land use focused, but also too, we're gonna be partnering with other agencies. They're gonna be helping us move some of these items forward too as well. So as we move to our implementation section, those items are tied to land use, but also have connections to other initiatives. For example, our OEQS department, environmental quality, sustainability, they have certain tools that identify, air monitoring, quality, what's happening from a water quality perspective. So being able to use or kind of help us identify maybe focus areas based on their analysis with our latest analysis, and start to kind of build upon maybe certain areas of focus where housing should be located, where other type of environmental remediation focus should also occur. So we're working to develop how we clearly define that this being a land use document. We have to stay within our bounds, but also too that we're partnering with other agencies who have other related kind of items that kind of tie to land use, but not trying to make this document all encompassing to include all those elements. So I'm curious from your perspective, if you're thinking that we should be showing all of those other contexts that aren't land use specific, or are you thinking about being clear that this is land use focused and kind of talking about the other, tangential relationships that could occur that's not related to this plan? I'm curious what you're thinking on that.
I think at least with using this the statistic without any kind of context gives me pause, just like the discussion we just had about what's context sensitive, and if we don't have any context sensitivity language, what could that mean in neighborhoods? Density in of itself, housing typologies like townhomes in and of themselves are not necessarily affordable, especially for families that are making well below median income. And so I just don't want there to be the thought that if we drastically or even moderately allow more density, allow more housing typologies, that we've solved affordability issues. So that's my concern.
Okay, just basically put it into context, like why, from a land use perspective, what that can help do, from what we're looking at, and basically saying it's not the end goal, it's not the pill to kind of solve the issue, but it's a particular component in this larger macro story. This is how we're using that to move it forward. Something like that we can clarify.
Absolutely. And then I agree. And I think you said it a lot better than I did. On the next page, CR A5, I guess it's kind of a similar question. So it says any redevelopment of existing multi-unit buildings should establish a plan to avoid displacement. And I think that's wonderful. I think it's extremely broad, and it's taking on a lot of responsibility at the city level. So just wanted to make sure that you were thinking through, if we're going to make that bold statement, how it would be implemented. So that's one. And then two, the second part of that statement, that including allowing more units in return for greater affordability. Are you, through this statement, proposing an expansion of the mixed income housing development bonus to more zoning districts, or just wanted to mention that that's a tool that's available?
Right, I think we can mention that tool, how that can be, that's a good point to think through the implementability of each of these items, and kind of which tool do we have or should develop to kind of move that forward. In terms of developing these, that's kind of where we're going and thinking about, is using those tools within housing to help develop that, but I think being clear of how that could occur, that's a good point.
Thanks. Those are my comments.
Any other feedback on the residential piece of our presentation today? All right, let's move on to the remaining portion.
All right. Area one is the thing starts. All right, so now we're gonna be discussing the industrial place types. Specifically, the new place types that we added, the logistic place types to respond to the feedback that we heard that, you know, there's still a particular type of place that we haven't defined that isn't heavy industrial, that isn't this transitional space, but it's kind of focused on just logistics and that kind of those kind of land uses that are surrounding that. So what we've done, just for kind of an overview, what we talked about last time, is develop that third industrial place type, which is in the middle, logistics hub. And that one's focused on wholesale large distribution areas, you know, for storage and focused on production and employment. These areas are usually larger in terms of parcel development, larger contiguous land, and also they have pretty good proximity to road infrastructure, freeways, freight, airports. So as we started to think through what that looks like throughout the city, that's the description that we started to kind of package together. The land uses are also on the side too. So this is just more, this is summary of what that is. For the club, we developed again those spreads as well. Through the place type descriptions for the club commercial, kind of being that place type that's more about the transition from kind of industrial uses or communities that were close to those particular areas and transitioning away from that. Logistical hub then becomes that particular place type that's focused on just logistics and moving, you know, manufacturing wholesale goods throughout community in a way that's not the disturbing of a particular neighborhood. And then the industrial hub is that heavier industrial place type that's focused on, you know, hazardous materials, construction materials, and moving those too as well through and out the city in a way that doesn't disrupt or provide environmental damage to a certain community. So those are the three that we developed. We can talk through those descriptions here too as well, but what I want to do is kind of actually talk through where they're located geographically and then get back to the descriptions that we have. So as we send that up to the club to review as well, we also started to identify where in the city each of those place types would be located. So I'm going to actually start from the industrial hub on the right, and we're going back to the commercial flex. So as we look at the industrial hub, most of those areas that exist are either on the periphery of the city or certain parts of the city that's been designated for example, a wastewater treatment facility, or in West Dallas, that particular part that's just south of the UP rail line. Other than that, every other industrial hub area is on the periphery. As we look into logistics hubs, same thing. Generally, those are also on the periphery of the city. A few of them kind of encroach into the city, but for the most part, those are also, in terms of the effect it has in the community, we want to be able to isolate those to themselves. So those are either by other cities or other adjacent cities that have those logistics centers and focus on that type of land use. So those are also on the periphery. And as we move to the flex commercial, you start to see that a lot of those occur within the city center, specifically along Trinity, being able to identify that we want some of those uses that existed along the Trinity to start to transition away from what it was from industrial hub or logistic hub to something that's cleaner, to something that's lower in scale, and to something that if it's going to be close by for the residential communities, that we start to think about, you know, how do we remove those noxious uses away from those communities. So those are the three kind of separated maps that we developed. We also developed kind of a combination of those as well. Two things I wanted to note on this combined map. The first note that we have, so it says the area that we have here, which is actually along the south of 4A, along Route 12, it was identified as industrial hub. That would actually move to the logistic hub. So I think that particular place type, when we just had the two, it fell more under the industrial hub, but with this new logistics hub, this particular place type, one, because it's within a community, and also two, the uses there are more industrial research. That has been identified as more of a logistic hub. And then two, closer to Cleburne, we have two wastewater treatment facilities in the city. The first one is actually, my mouse didn't show up here. The first one is actually here. It's called the Central Wastewater Treatment Facility. The second one we have is the South Side treatment facility. So this whole gray that you see here, this is one parcel owned by the city. Right now it's under the regional open space, but that's the wrong place type designation. So we're looking into that particular place type designation in terms of if that should be industrial hub. If it is, it's surrounded by residential. What does that mean moving forward? Because those two wastewater treatment facilities, they're not going anywhere. They're there for particularly critical purpose. So how we code that down there is going to be critical, especially with what's happening on the periphery. So I would say note that for this audience and for those listening online, that this is the combination of those three particular place types with a few notes that we're still reviewing internally just to think through as we move forward with kind of getting this logistic hub in the mix with these other two. So as we develop these, we're hoping that these kind of provide different context, and I think the suggestion to create this one made a lot of sense for us as we started to identify where those occur, but open to the conversation related to the particular description, the descriptors, and also to the map analysis that we took to kind of do a quick stab of where they're located. So with that, I can go back to the beginning and kind of focus on the maps. This is kind of up for us to kind of think through if this logistics hub still makes sense. I think staff would think it does make sense based on the feedback that we received, but want to get some feedback from you all to help us to kind of pin this one and also continue with the development of this document.
Mr. Carpenter?
Okay, yeah, well, I agree with logistics hub because what was going on from the very beginning. My remaining problem with this map with industrial place types is the industrial hub location that's in West Dallas.
Yeah.
Because as it talks here about how, historically it's inequitably placed and Forward Dallas need to move toward equity. There's no equity in keeping that there. And then we got a recent letter from community members and community advocates pointing out that what's going to happen if we know we're not creating new industrial hub areas at this point. So the ones that exist are inequitably located. The way West Dallas is redeveloping, we're getting more and more residential and mixed use development right on that border, on the northern border, between the railroad track and Singleton. And what's going to happen if we maintain industrial hub is all of the most incompatible businesses are going to say, well, this is where we need to be. And it's going to increase the inequity there. I had at one point suggested that we subdivide industrial hub, take out the dirtier industries, have something like an industrial park designation that would take out the crushing and the, and all that sort of thing. But, that didn't go forward. But if that's the case, these are the place types we're going to be living with, then I just can't see the industrial hub being supported at that location.
That location there in West Dallas,
Yeah.
that mainly has warehousing.
It mainly is. I mean, the biggest incongruity there is something the city did fairly recently when they paid the Argos concrete batch plant to move from across from Trinity Groves to right behind the only middle school in West Dallas to give them a permanent SUP to do it. But if With the industrial hub, it will just attract more of them, I mean, inevitably, and that would be a compounding a very great historical wrong.
That if there's some dirty industrial uses that are out there in this house right now, we've made those, we've removed those out of the industrial hub place type in those locations, but if then across the street, we say that it's still an industrial hub, that's where they would then be more likely to locate, even if there's existing warehousing there.
Right. And we've got schools and communities there, and then more communities coming.
Yeah, so that's actually one of them really glad about this one, because this is one I had a question about and wanted to talk through. So I think the other ones that we have here in terms of the location that makes sense, this is kind of a more interior kind of located one. And as I was looking at the land uses around it, it's exactly what you mentioned, it's mostly warehouses. Also too, looking in terms of where we, what I traditionally would say, where we were to this map. So the industrial hub has dramatically decreased in terms of the footprint, like a lot. So the next thing we need to do is actually look at just kind of crunching numbers in terms of, is this sustainable for 300,000 more people in the city? Like if you're going to be housing that many people, we're gonna need these areas to basically support development, you know, those other uses. So I think if you mentioned like the location of this one, part of this doesn't make sense. Like we're sort of tweaking through that, but if we have to think about other parts of the city, where the next go, that's also something we can think about. But I think this one that we looked at, I was curious from your perspective, it's more of a logistics hub. Should that be more of a logistics hub kind of component? Do we modify the logistics hub to include some of those uses that are cleaner in this area? Which I think would make sense in terms of like the initial kind of conversation about, you know, the industrial hub splitting into two and having the business part of that. I think the logistics hub could include the business part piece. And then that becomes a different hub and still kind of touches what we talked
I mean, I think the nature of the area is likely to stay in some type of industrial, and
Right.
it doesn't have to be, you know, grotesquely incompatible with, because I mean, it does have, you know, the freeway adjacencies, it has the streets that it needs. It's built to be an industrial park, but at the same time, it just does not need to have the place type that's going to encourage,
Right.
you know, more incompatibility. So what the solution is from your point of view, I don't know. Because it's not precisely like logistics hub. It's kind of like industrial hub light or something like that.
So I think it, because, Mr. Yu was talking through it, that the flex commercial could allow, a clean industrial inside.
Mhm.
But the logistical hub could also allow that.
Right.
But the biggest difference between the flex commercial and the logistics hub is the logistics hub then allows big warehouses.
Right.
Where the flex commercial doesn't allow big warehouses.
Right. I think too, like, if we're thinking about the logistics hub and maybe like the business park piece, maybe that name changes. Maybe it's logistics and something else. So I think that logistics hub is something to be clear. Okay, where the dirtier uses are. I think it's starting to be clear where that's located. Flex commercial does kind of from community feedback about transition areas, that makes sense too. And that kind of middle place where either you're kind of keeping that industrial park the way it is, or keeping logistics the way it is, maybe that's kind of what we refine and tweak. But let me know.
Topography there isn't really conducive to the building of this huge
Right.
business warehouse, because it's hilly and the some of the parcels are reasonably good size, but nothing like what you need
Right.
for a logistics hub. There are warehouses, but you know, warehouses and logistic distribution centers are different.
Or maybe something like we did with the community residential where we have two content.
Community investment.
Legacy.
Neighborhood industrial, right? Oh my gosh.
No, but I think something to look into.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other big change with this is that there are some areas that on this map are showing as logistic hubs that were industrial hubs.
Yes.
That taking away
The dirtier stuff.
the dirtiest stuff from those areas where, you know, whether it's there along 20, you know, whether it's the west end of the design district, like those, taking that out of it, I think is a good step.
Okay, I think going back to this last note about where that wastewater treatment facility is, as I'm looking at the inland port and what those other cities have there, I'm gonna be kind of analyzing their land uses to see what that red circle should be. I think the biggest thing is gonna be how, if it say it becomes industrial hub or logistic hub, those residential units all around there. So that thinking about what that adjacency looks like, that's gonna be tricky, but that could be another location of helping to, as we grow as a city, be able to still kind of have that particular land use available for an increased population. I want to be able to kind of clearly identify that too. But
And that's not being, I have to say, not explicitly being tied to any particular place type. There is language here that talks about the 500-foot buffer that it's talking, analyzing the city's land distribution and how much land is within 500 feet of an industrial zone district. 500 feet is just not an adequate, it's an adequate buffer for the lighter types of industry, but for the dirty industries, 500 feet is nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing.
Right,
It's not anything that a fence and some landscaping can
definitely.
rectify. Really gonna have, what we did recently with concrete batch plants was putting it at 1,500 feet. And, for things like concrete, I mean, just dirty stuff. 500 feet is just insulting.
No, we got that from our information, the same thing. So I think just kind of context for this context. When we did an analysis, we basically started with from a lady's perspective, just be able to identify something that's kind of concrete that we can play with. So with this analysis, within 500 feet, this is kind of what we identified. It's not saying that 500 feet is the buffer that should be looked at, but just based on the analysis that was done, that was a particular buffer. But I think we heard from 1,000 feet in terms of air, particular pollution and other things like that, the effects of pollution as well. 1,500 is also one that we've heard to be able to see that particular adjacency from residential to industrial, either zoning or land uses.
TCEQ burns, it seems like it goes within 1,000 and 1,500.
Right,
So it'd be interesting to see what the figure is within 1,000 and 1,500 feet. But to me, trying to read this code, it just looks as if 500 feet is somehow like, oh, well, after 501 feet, everything's okay, and it's just really not.
No, we can talk about others.
Can we go back to the big map, the overlay map for a second? I just want to make sure that I understand the boundaries of what's currently designated as industrial hub in West Dallas. Is it the UP track to the north? Is that the northern boundary? Just go all the way up to Singleton.
This is the UP.
Okay. Gotcha. Then Hampton on the east, and then something else on the Westmore. Okay. Great. Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that. Members, additional questions, comments? All right.
We're getting closer. What was that?
I said, I think we're getting closer.
Okay, awesome. I guess one last question to the business part, because I think with these suite of place types, do you feel that the logistics hub could best kind of maybe incorporate that business park type of?
To me, they're very different. They're very different. Because the logistics and distribution is the size, the scale's different, the roadways, it's really different types of businesses. These are mostly inside industrial, they're meatpacking plants, they're catering companies, they're book warehouses, they're, animal SPCA's out there, air conditioning filter places, bulk mail facilities. They're not incompatible industrial uses. They're inside industrial uses that, while they might not be the most scenic or architecturally interesting buildings in the world, but they're not the kinds of things that are grossly incompatible with the residential mixed use adjacencies. But to place industrial hub on there is really an intensification of what is there.
Does the business park fit in your mind within flex commercial, or is it still too?
So I think the scale and the scope of those structures would mirror more the logistics hub than the flex commercial. They're big structures and they're large footprinted. They're big parcels, large footprinted parcels, as opposed to, the 10,000 square foot warehouse, the 8,000 square foot warehouse.
There's still not the intensity of traffic and the scale that a logistics hub is. It's really not set up. I mean, drive the streets. I drive the streets. They're many times a week, because I have to drive through that industrial park to get from my house to the Dallas Animal Services, where I spend way too much time, but, you know, it's just, I don't think you could run a logistics, and then probably, you know, Amazon type logistics hub, and that it would be, it really is kind of a different animal. Because if you go flex commercial, almost like, because you're saying here that flex commercial should transition, you'd be transitioning to something else. I'm not sure they should transition to something else. I mean, these kinds of businesses are needed.
Yeah, transition of stage, maybe, so we have to be a piece. So, my thing on that one, with, particular uses that you're talking about, in that part of West Dallas, the traffic that, is kind of created from those uses, would you say the traffic is similar to what you see in logistics hub, with a bunch of trucks going in and out? Would you say it's
No, it's less, it's much less.
much less?
Yeah, because most of these are not served by tremendous numbers of trucks coming. You know, they have big trucks that come and bring whatever, you know, the mail they're sorting that day, or the food products they're dealing with. It's not just set up to relentlessly.
Gotcha. So I feel like, as we're talking about it, that the flex commercial, like, kind of as it is, kind of maybe reflects what you're talking about, because as we're transitioning, you know, flex commercial to something else, it's gonna go to another place, like commercial, mixed use, whatever. That's kind of the idea for some of these areas, but.
I think the flex commercial is going to evolve past what we've got in that area.
Right. So maybe that's kind of, we play with the language on that one too as well. Maybe that's to kind of show the scale, but, I think there's some room to kind of accommodate that. So go ahead, Sam.
Oh, Ms.
sorry.
McCann had a question online, and we'll go to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Sorry I was late to the meeting today. Is there a way just to show where the existing industrial hubs are relative to the new designations?
We have, yes and no. So we have a map of existing land uses. We also have a
Okay.
map of our initial analysis of place types. That
Okay,
is not the most accurate, because we started the first kind of cut at it. So we can kind of do the analysis of our existing land uses versus this map, what might be the most accurate analysis to show kind of the differences. And what we're gonna be doing
Right.
also too is showing the evolution of the place type of these place types over
Okay.
each iteration, to kind of basically show like how it's shrunken over time. So we can
Okay.
create those analyses for this next go round.
that would be helpful, because I mean, I think that's an important point for people to hear. I do know that like concrete batch plants, even though they may not be, they're not supposed to be operating. There's one that's operating off of Martin Luther King Boulevard that is not supposed to be there, but it's operating, and it's really creating hazardous traffic, as well as, you know, environmental issues along MLK Boulevard. So, you know, understanding exactly where allowed uses are today relative to what you're saying, I think is an important part of the story here. And maybe that's what you're planning as well. Where is Hensley Field over here by the logistics hub that you've got designated with the arrow? That's Hensley Field. Okay. And then just a question, and apologize for not being knowledgeable about this, but if you're talking about a small manufacturing facility that's creating jobs, where would that be in flex commercial? Or would it be dependent upon what they were actually manufacturing as to how you would determine where it was, where it should fit?
So yes, yeah, two things. So the scale, yes, would be within the flex commercial, but if those uses are within the more heavier, kind of more noxious kind of side of things, then those would probably be located in our industrial hub locations. So there could be some areas that exist. There could be some areas that exist outside of this that are heavier in terms of those uses. This land use map would show the kind of where those should be located moving forward.
And who's going to make the determination as to where it would fit in terms of the type of industry? So I know this isn't happening, but like say a Tesla plant wanted to be located in Dallas, where would a Tesla plant be? Would that be industrial hub or?
Yeah, so that's kind of gonna be part of the zoning kind of connections to these place types. So in terms of where some of those larger auto distribution, kind of either or showrooms are, typically they're within the industrial research, so they could fall within the hub, the flex, and or the heavier industrial hub location. So the particular zoning category that we have now is going to be critical that we kind of do a quick analysis to show suggested locations of where those should be located. Our current zoning kind of shows those generally, and for the most part, they fit within each of these place types. But I think that particular example, that's going to be one that we can kind of identify clearly, because that could fall within any of these, depending on the current definition of that particular category.
Okay, and so I'm asking from the perspective of being on the new City of Dallas Economic Development Corporation, which is going to be responsible for luring businesses to Dallas and those that create jobs. So trying to identify exactly where, if there was a truck manufacturing facility, where would that be? I mean, if it's a small manufacturing that's dependent upon different products, but not a dirty business. I mean, that's, I think, going to be important for us to be able to be knowledgeable about, so that we would know exactly what kinds of businesses we need to target for creation of jobs, particularly in Southern Dallas.
Yeah, we can kind of go back internally and kind of clarify kind of where that should go. We had a few suggestions based on kind of the last few weeks, but we can definitely kind of circle back and kind of have a conversation about that, what we're thinking about that.
I think that would be, just a little off topic, but at some point, an education process with the Economic Development Corporation Board would be very helpful.
Okay, definitely.
Thank you.
Sure.
Going back to our business park logistics conversation, kind of as we were talking, I'm not sure if this is maybe the best way to approach it, but I'm offering it as a potential way to think about it and frame is kind of like we had in the residential discussion in terms of curvilinear and gridded. There may be, it sounds like a lot of the, or at least kind of in my experience, is like, it's, you were talking a lot, Commissioner Carpenter, about, scale, design, and I was thinking that sounds a lot like the urban design of what's going on. So there may be some opportunities to, within the industrial hub place type, or whatever that place type is, to maybe make some distinctions from an urban design perspective that allow for, okay, this is more, this is a logistics, that's like curvilinear is logistics, and then business park is gridded. But for comparison's sake, it's like for these different types of contexts and designs, like this is how those should be approached.
Right.
It may apply in some instances, it may apply in one or the other, but again, I think at the bottom line, it's not just urban design that's at play there, and there's other ways and other. First, I thought you were asking. Yeah. But there may be some other things that are beyond just what urban design elements could create some delineation. I don't know, something to think about.
That's a great point, because as I was kind of hearing kind of the feedback, the UD piece came to mind, but also the transportation piece came to mind, especially as we're looking at the complete streets in some of these areas. What one of those areas need to change? I might even go back and see what that particular designation, even our third plan, says in that area. That might help inform kind of that as well. So that's those, either the logistics hub or flex commercial. I feel like there's a good argument for either tweaking those two to kind of help with that piece. But I think it's a good point to kind of look at.
And it may help with some of the adjacency conversations as well.
Just for the record, we've outlasted Zoa today.
Oh.
Anyone else have additional questions or comments? Mr. Gu, was that the last piece of your
That was
presentation?
the last piece of today's discussion.
Give us just a quick preview of what's coming up at our next meeting.
Yes, so we have two more meetings this year, the 28th of this month in 2 weeks, and then the 12th of December. So what we're planning on doing is publishing draft 2 of this plan based on the feedback that we've heard so far, and then discussing that initially in the next meeting. Our team, a few of us will be gone for the month of December, but basically we want to get this out to you all as soon as possible and out to the public as soon as possible. So we have the rest of the year to refine it, tweak it, make any comments, and then hopefully by the time we get to December, make a recommendation to CPC with any amendments or changes on the plan document. So what we plan on doing is publishing a draft for you all to have during the next meeting. And then that meeting will probably just be a discussion about the draft, kind of first impressions, kind of let you all know how to help develop and think through the next kind of component of this particular draft document. And then the following meeting on the 12th of December, that'll be when you all provide a recommendation to CPC. We'll kind of talk through what the logistics look like in that particular meeting to provide the CPC in terms of what we want to see amended, how the document should be moved forward, and then what staff should be doing to kind of move this through the process. So hopefully by the end of the year, you all have kind of made your mark on the particular plan document, and then also provide some recommendations for CPC to move forward with the development of getting this to council.
We're gonna also be discussing the South Dallas Fair Park area plan as well. Before that meeting, you would have the land use recommendations part of that plan. Because again, although the area plan does discuss other things, that's what, you comprehensive land use plan committee. So that would be the meeting where we would be presenting those. We would also have the opportunity to make recommendations about changes in that plan as well, or the land use recommendations of that plan as well.
So for clarity, so next meeting, two agenda items for Dallas, getting the draft number 2, and then also getting 3 South Dallas Fair Park. There won't be any action items for any of those.
Yeah, I don't believe there is an action on the South Dallas Fair Park plan, and that would be where we're looking for feedback from you all, but not a formal vote to say this is great or bad.
Right, because the land use piece of that too, a lot of it is within for Dallas. We're going to be talking about the other components that are going to be moving forward, the CPC and other kind of bodies, but it's more just kind of getting more guidance as that kind of moves through the.
Yeah, because there will be some, again, the way a good area plan works with a good comprehensive plan is you have a comprehensive plan, it's a big vision, and then the area plan does have some more detail on certain areas. But again, it's not a corridor or a neighborhood plan, so it's not 1000% detailed, but it is more detailed than 4,000%.
I didn't realize we were wrapping up this conversation, because there are quite a few things in here I'd like to discuss, but I'll get taken offline, because I'll give you an example under like logistics. It's talking about elongated buildings and warehouses within this place type should be broken up where possible to accommodate a connected street block network. To me, that's a total misunderstanding.
I think that comes out of the flex commercial language.
Okay.
Or language that was developed for the flex commercial, that's that area that a potential area to start to redevelop. But we are doing this steps. That's where.
That's where you put in this, sorry. Yeah, under flex commercial, where it says here, in instances where an industrial facility includes a structure that requires increased height, the structure is located so it does not significantly visually or physically impact nearby residential areas. I can't imagine what you're thinking about, an industrial facility in flex commercial that would need more height unless it's something with a smokestack, which wouldn't seem to be in a transit. Okay, so I can tell.
Yes, now that we have pretty clear guidance on these 3 place types, we can move forward with then ratings that language to better reflect the direction.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to be clear, because I thought we were gonna go through these and incorporate this way, but I think you're all one.
One other thing to note, it sounds like we have the late November meeting, December meeting. Obviously, I want this to be. Would love it if we were able to move this on to CPC at our December 12th meeting. So I hope everyone comes prepared to, roll up their sleeves at these next two meetings, really, whip these things into shape. I believe that as the chair, I do have the ability to call special meetings of the comp plan, not that I particularly want to in December as we get closer to the holidays, but if it's something that's necessary to get this thing over the hump, that is something that I would consider doing.
Could I also ask, is there any plan going forward not to have Zoe and clubs be on the same day?
Yeah, that was a weird, it's never happened before, but usually CPC is first and third Thursday. And it turns out that's possible to not be the case. So yeah, my recommendation is gonna be that we orient these meetings in relation to CPC meetings and maybe do the Tuesday after.
Sure.
But that's gonna become more of a moot issue after Forward Dallas is done. But I still think we can move towards trying to align it to CPC so that that doesn't happen again. And the other thing to note is that a committee does need to meet a minimum of once quarterly. So that may become a reality. That meeting can be canceled, but
And I think after this committee finishes with the Forward Dallas piece and, turns to exclusively area or neighborhood plans, the CPC's Rules Committee may take a look at the composition and of this committee. I think a 17-member committee to look at area plans may be a little bit large compared to the much heavier lift that we have with clubs. So things may adjust after we pass Forward Dallas along to CPC. One other thing, I think we had one speaker who was maybe confused about when the public speakers were speaking. So we'll go ahead and hear from her.
In person?
Yeah. All right, good morning, Ms. Conley. Just start with your name and address for the record, and then you have 3 minutes.
Have 901 North Madison. I'm not confused. I don't know the order of your meetings. If we talk first, then we're talking about what's already happened. I like to talk after y'all talk so I can comment on what you didn't talk about. And the place types give me a problem. You are not giving us the opportunity for neighborhood self-determination. Years ago, our city elected council people at large. This left neighborhoods both north of the Trinity and south of the Trinity without representation. Neighborhoods did not always have the knowledge, the money, or whatever to run for office. So the city changed that. And they changed it to a certain number of districts and then 3 at large. That still made an imbalance. So they finally went to the council districts that we know now. Not perfect, and we still have problems with that. But we still need a place type for single family, not duplexes, not triplexes, not any of the cute words that we're using now. We have neighborhoods that are single family. They're already extremely dense. The developers will want to make more dense. We don't have the infrastructure to handle that. Have any of y'all driven down Davis lately and seen the traffic problems there? Do you understand what this will do to us and to other neighborhoods as well? Now you say that, and we understand that this isn't a zone change. We're not stupid, okay? But it is the framework for setting up a zoning change. And it has happened to us repeatedly, so this isn't something new. We've dealt with Forward Dallas in the past, and we've seen what it has brought zoning cases in front of us. Some passed, some didn't pass, but they should have. Because our neighborhood was developed before we had zoning, we do have different types in there now already. That doesn't even begin to allow for our houses that are multi-generational. And so we have enough cars for one house that would fill a block in a lot of neighborhoods. I don't think what y'all are doing here takes that into consideration. I don't know whether it can or not, but we still want a designation for a single family, not attached, detached, whatever, flat, single family. And I think we should have the right to look at that instead of just saying, no, you have this option, but you don't have the option for this over here. Thank you for your patience in listening to me and for coming in at the last. But it's frustrating to sit here and listen.
Hey, Ms. Collins, that's your time.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, I think that concludes our agenda for today. So it is now 10:38 a.m. And this meeting of the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Committee is adjourned.
Is there